Hey everybody. Today we are going to be going through some of the basics of our revolutionary history. I'm expecting that you've heard a lot of this story before, so really we're looking at this as an overview. Please make sure that you already have downloaded the notes sheet here that you're looking at on the screen and you've made a copy of it for yourself. You will be taking your notes in this and go back to the directions video to get the exact expectations for that formative assignment here. All right, so clicking over here, we're looking at the foundations of government, that road to freedom. How did we get here? We spent some time talking about what those founding fathers wanted in America, how they wanted to be different. Today, we're going to take a look at why they wanted it to be different from what they've experienced in the past. So we'll start here at the beginning. What was it like to live in Great Britain during we'll start in the mid 1700s here. Truthfully, Great Britain was the strongest nation in the world. You're living under the protection of a king, and you had probably some of the most rights of a lot of groups around the world if you're living in Britain. It's going to be a different experience for those people living in the colonies. So those living under the control of a monarchy, if you think about if I had to live under the control of a monarch, the British citizens had a lot more personal freedoms than other people around the world at this time. In the colonies, this was really different. American colonies were far away. It took a long time for laws to get across, and the communication between the monarch and the colonies was so slow that a lot of times it was hard to have a real conversation about needs and wants between these two groups. Colonial men, though, were not really fully trusted to govern themselves. They considered kind of backwards, ignorant, and that this expectation that they would make bad decisions if they led themselves. And so the king also felt like the colonists kind of needed to be treated like the kids, like he was their parent, he was their dad, and he ruled them like that, like a dad or a parent would control their kids if needed. Now, having a voice in government is a big deal now, and it was a big deal then too, because most people in the mid 1700s had no say in their government at all. Especially if you're in the middle or lower class, you just had to do what they told you or suffer the consequences. And so, this idea that something else could happen, a new idea would emerge during the Enlightenment, which you should have talked about in world history. This idea where people start questioning, why is that? Questioning, why can't we question our government? Right? They're not any smarter than us. And people really starting to push past those ideas that only the king can rule or only the queen can rule. And it's pretty radical stuff back then to think that an average Joe could step up and make some decisions for himself. Now, from the king's perspective, the colonies are going to be treated differently because they were thought of as lower class. They were treated as kind of kids. They weren't quite up to par as the home country. And so with that, they're going to treat them like that. Also, you have situations where the colonists, in frustration, start treating agents of the king or people working for the king negatively. Boycotts and even speaking openly and openly defiant and violent against some of those, whether they're tax collectors or messengers or whoever they are. And of course, the king is not, he's going to hear about this and be frustrated. He's going to be upset that his people, who are traditionally supposed to just do what he said, are now targeting people that are working for him and just outright disobeying his rule. And so he's going to treat those people disobeying like a parent would treat a kid disobeying. He's going to punish them. And he's going to find different ways to do that. And if, just like your parents, if you get punished and that way doesn't work, they'll find another punishment. And so this is going to start to be the pattern that we see throughout this time. So why were they frustrated? How did British decisions affect colonists? Two real ways. One was monetarily, right? You look at the economy, they were frustrated that they had higher taxes than other members of the empire, of British citizens. They were frustrated with that. Now, truthfully, that's not completely true because people living in Britain actually they paid more money. They had higher taxes. But the frustration for the colonists was that they paid those taxes, but they're paying for things that really didn't connect to them at all. They weren't getting the benefits of that money. And so the idea of taxes is you give money to the government, and then the government does something with that money, and then you get something kind of back in return, whether it's garbage pickup or whatever. That's just one simple example. Effectively running schools, right? Those types of things, a police department. But the colonists were feeling like they were paying those taxes, but they weren't getting enough back for that. Probably even the bigger thing that they were becoming more frustrated with was just legally their rights as British citizens they felt were being taken away. And a lot of this was in the form of maybe some punishments, but some not. So trial rights, personal freedoms, no privacy. So you have things like quartering where British soldiers could just outright stay in your home. They just had to tell you they were going to. They had a closed marketplace. So within their economy, they're trying to grow their economy in the colonies, and really they're being told they can only buy things within like the British Empire. They can only buy British goods. So the prices were inflated and they're paying more than they thought they need to. These types of things, these basic things of I want to buy what I want from who I want to buy it from. Right? I want the right to not have the military stay in my home. Right? I want to feel protected and heard. And I want to say in what was happening in our government. I want certain trial rights. If I'm accused of something, I want to be able to defend myself and prove that I didn't do that thing. And so all of these things were things that they were becoming more and more frustrated with across the board. Now, it's not like they got frustrated and they jumped right into war. Okay, when we talk about this in our War and Peace theme, we're going to see that there's over a decade of trying to figure this out before actual gunshots go off. And so some of the things that they tried that we'll look at later in the trimester here is petitions and letters to the king. Like literally, you sign a petition, you send it off, and it just tells, hey, this many people agree with this statement. But they often found that the king oftentimes didn't even see those letters. You have protests, so just getting your voice heard, and many of them, those nonviolent, right? But some did, erupt in violence and, chaos, that kind of stuff. And then boycotts, and boycotts is just refusing to buy a certain product, and so boycotts against British goods. And that varied what the target was throughout the years. So what did the colonists try before, war continued, sorry, I should have known that. So throughout the 1700s, we see reactions getting worse and worse. So they go from, petitions to protests to boycotts to then going up and they're outright just destroying goods. So that's, you have that in the Boston Tea Party. We'll talk about that. Going up and just like physically, violently hurting British officials with tarring and feathering, which is awful. It's awful in so many ways, and we'll get into that too. And then to outright warfare, which is that first Battle of Lexington and Concord in 1775. So it's a gradual increase of this isn't working, so we're going to step it up. This isn't working, so we're going to step it up, right? Until the only thing left is war. So that increasing amount of tensions, those boycotts, that violence is eventually going to lead to a war in 1775. And the Revolutionary War is going to last till 1783 when that treaty is finally signed. So did their reactions work? Did our buildup work? Well, it depends on what your goal is, right? It made them feel better. It made them feel like they had control over the situation, right? Which sometimes happens when people react violently to things. That's not in any way a positive way to react. It made the king way more upset, right? And made him really want to punish everything they did, made him want to punish the colonists even more. And it led to war where 25,000 people were killed. So that was not good. But in the end, because we won the war, we gained that freedom from Great Britain. And so a lot of people would say, yeah, it did work. But it was a long, painful, terrible process throughout this. So let's just pause right here. And you can pause the video if you need to. But take a second and answer this part of your note sheet that talks about why did the colonists believe they needed to break away from Great Britain? All right. So after you've answered that, let's go on. What's the next phase? So how did they want America to be different? So we've had this all build up. They talked about all this stuff where they wanted to change America and they wanted to be different. So how are they actually going to make this happen? Right? They wanted America based on our founding fathers stuff. They wanted America to be a place where rights were given to people at birth, right? And that you just naturally had those rights until death. That was kind of the foundation of what they wanted here. And they wanted to list out specifically what some of those rights would be. In America, they wanted it to be a place where you could be judged, individually, not based on what your parents did, not on what your brother did, but on who you were and what you did in your life, right? And they wanted America to be a place where no matter where you come from, if you work hard, right, you can, and you have goals and you're willing to sacrifice, you can get to where you want to be. Right? We call that the American dream. So how does slavery fit into this idea? Because this is this overarching, huge, terrible cloud over all of this idea of freedom and equality and individual rights. Because in the midst of those conversations, most of these guys had connections to or actually literally owned slaves. And so the reality is this doesn't fit. Slavery does not fit into this American idea. In fact, any sort of racist idea does not fit into this idea. When you're judging people based on things that are not connected to their being, that's not freedom and that's not equality. And so the American system has been flawed in this way from the very beginning. And we're going to investigate that throughout the year as we try to reckon with what's happening in our country even today. So the founders who wrote these freedoms and opportunities, they believed that many of them foundationally believed that these opportunities should only be reserved for people that are educated, white men. Right? So this even narrows it down even further based on race, because you have to be of a certain social economic status to be entering that as well. So even now, 250 years after this conversation was started, people are still fighting for this idea of equality in America. So as we go into this, then our next step is we have this kind of basis of how and why we got here, this kind of foundational movement here. Our founding fathers, they're going to take these ideas, right? You saw their individual ideas, kind of quickly ran through some of the history of how they worked together through this. But then they're going to take this idea and they're going to create 3 distinct foundational documents for America. So the Declaration of Independence is going to be passed within the first year of the war, right? And then after the war is over, they're going to set up the U.S. Constitution and later and on the Bill of Rights. And so this is where we're going next. Going into next week, we'll be starting to look at these 3 documents, and we'll be taking a look at how did they take these ideas of what they wanted America to be and try to make it into a reality. And we'll start to investigate whether they were able to do that or not. All right, thank you very much. That is it for this particular slideshow. Make sure that you have filled out this notes sheet completely, and then you're going to drop it into the Schoology Dropbox. All right, and that is it. All right, we'll see you guys later. See you next time you're in class, and have a good one.